The term emo has been thrown around a lot in recent years, so much so that it's kind of lost its meaning. People will label anything a little just black emo, and that kind of muddies the waters on what emo is and isn't. At its roots, what is emo? Who are emos? What does emo stand for? Emo, or Emocore, or emotional hardcore, is a culture that has been around for almost 40 years now with a deep and rich history. Emo can be divided into waves, usually one per decade, that have a different sound than the rest. Each wave has a different fashion style, culture, and even music entirely. Today we'll be focusing on the catalyst of emo, Revolution Summer. Hey, before we fully get into the video, I want to give a disclaimer. I could be wrong about some things. This is not very well documented. A lot of things are muddy. And I wasn't alive back then, obviously. It was the 1980s, and I'm 17 years old. So I apologize if I get anything wrong, and I'm open to fix it. So if you were around back then, you were a part of the DC scene, and you see anything that's wrong, drop a comment, and I will fix it, okay? Thank you. Also, new view of my room. I switched my room around because my cat threw up and pooped under my bed. So it's on the floor now. Moved my room around. You guys have never seen this view of my room. Enough of my rambling. Let's get into the video. Washington, D.C. was dubbed to have the best hardcore punk scene in the country at the time. It was even considered by some to be the first hardcore scene. Eventually, though, all good things come to an end. Or do they? In the mid-1980s, there was a decline in the scene. There were a lot of people, mainly skinheads, who were flooding the scene with violence, racism, sexism, to name a few things, and it devolved most shows into fights and vandalism. It's always been commonplace to respect the spot, and that just wasn't happening. People didn't want to hold shows anymore because their place was getting wrecked. Around this same time, a lot of people in the scene started to embrace the term straight edge from the Minor Threat song of the same title. The beloved hardcore scene was dwindling and fading away. Shows were turning fun into destruction. And there was a new group of people with radical ideas that were spreading their ideology, which a lot of people didn't like. All of these events combined eventually were the catalyst to Revolution Summer. Revolution Summer was the event that, without it, we would have never gotten emo music to begin with. The awful culture and state of the hardcore scene at the time, a certain person was very fed up with it. Enter Amy Pickering, vocalist of hardcore band Fire Party. As a woman in the scene at the time, Pickering was not stranger to misogyny and harassment. This was something that drew her to the hardcore scene even more. It was a safe haven of sorts. She was brought up in the hardcore scene during high school, and as an adult went on to form her own band and even work for Dischord Records. Of course, Dischord wasn't immune to the misogyny. So on her first day there was a sign saying, "No skirts allowed," and she tore it down. There's a lot of fuzzy details in the story because it was 1980, but eventually, Pickering grows very discontent with the state of the scene and decides to take matters into her own hands. Again, I don't have a timeline, but eventually she starts sending out letters to people in the scene to respire or inspire punks. She wanted people to reflect on the way the scene was going, and it was in those letters that the term Revolution Summer was first coined. Now, like some bands signed to the same record label, they were pretty tight-knit at Dischord Records. All the bands signed to them kind of had their own scene of their own, so to say. It was more leftist than the mainstream hardcore scene at the time. To name a few examples, they were very aware of the sexism in the scene, and because of the straight edge influence, they embraced animal activism and vegetarianism, and surprisingly, they did not like moshing at shows. They considered that an act of violence, and so they didn't like it. Now, reading straight off of my script, because I'm not going to be able to remember all this. Some Revolution Summer bands include Fire Party, of course, Beef Eater, Rites of Spring, you probably know that one, Embrace, Dag Nasty, and Lunch Meat. Fun fact, a lot of the bands that were around at this time went on to form Fugazi. Something to note though, yes, emotional hardcore was born during Revolution Summer, but that was not the music at the time. There was no sound for Revolution Summer. It was just people making what they thought would revive the scene. So all of these bands were not Emocore, they were not emo, Dag Nasty is not considered an emo band, but they were around during Revolution Summer. There was no cohesive sound. They were all just playing together, same time, same place, same agenda. Revive the scene. Emotional hardcore is a genre first credited to Rites of Spring and their self-titled album released in 1985. While hardcore punk would focus on fast, heavy guitars and technical drum parts, Rites of Spring, the album, deviated from the hardcore punk standard by combining more melodic guitar parts and emotional lyrics to create what the scene dubbed as emotional hardcore, or Emocore. Another Revolution Summer band, Embrace, is also credited with the creation of Emocore, although they do not get as much credit as Rites of Spring does. If you ask somebody anything about emotional hardcore, the first band they're going to bring up is Rites of Spring. That can probably be due to the fact that they aren't proud about this. This isn't something that they're going around saying, I invented emo, I invented Emocore. In fact, they kind of really hated it. Remember, the whole idea of Revolution Summer was to revive the hardcore punk scene, not to make anything new. So when people started calling this new stuff emotional hardcore, it was met with discontentment from the members of these bands. One of emo's first haters was Ian Mackay. He was in the scene for a while, and you probably know him from Minor Threat, but during this time he was in the band Embrace. After the breakup of Minor Threat, many thought that he gave up on hardcore, but the way he saw it, hardcore was the one giving up.
I must say one thing. I must say, Emocore must be the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
Oh, come on, man!
But, just in case you're wondering, I read in my Thrasher the other day that in fact, what my band, along with other bands in the city, was playing was Emocore. Emotional hardcore. As if hardcore wasn't emotional to begin with.
So Ian Mackay didn't embrace the label, but what about Rites of Spring? Even as the band that's touted with making emocore, unsurprisingly, Rites of Spring also didn't like it. Rites of Spring's guitar guy, Picciotto, I'm not calling him guitar guy, his name is Guy, Picciotto had his own thing to say about emotional hardcore. Quote, I've never recognized emo as a genre of music. I always thought it was the most R-word term ever. I know this is a generic commonplace that every band gets labeled with that term hates it. They feel scandalized by it, but honestly, I just thought the bands I played with were punk rock bands. The reason I think it's so stupid is that, what? Like, the Bad Brains weren't emotional? What, were they robots or something? It doesn't make sense to me. Honestly, I can understand where they're coming from. You're in a scene making music that you love and you're pouring your heart into it. And then here comes people labeling this new stuff as emotional. And it's like, was the stuff I'm making before not emotional? Like, especially because this was most likely newer people to the scene and journalists. There was people in newspapers writing about them for the first time saying, look at Emocore, look at this new thing, new people at their shows. And it must have felt really strange to them. I'm not gonna fault them for not liking the term emo. I think the confusion is maybe like anger as an emotion versus sadness as an emotion. Because when you say, I'm really emotional right now, you're not usually angry, you're usually sad. So maybe that's where they were coming from with that. But who knows? Even though Guy and other guys in the scene hated the term emo, that didn't stop it from blossoming into a huge subculture that has no signs of slowing down anytime soon. Next summer will mark 40 years of emotional hardcore. Then we can get to 50, and 60, and 100. Honestly, I want to know where you stand on the matter. Are you Team Mackay, hardcore is already emotional, or Team let people label things? Did you know about Revolution Summer? Was this enlightening? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you liked this video. Subscribe for more. Bye. Oh, and thank you to the mother of the revolution, Amy Pickering.
After the Revolution Summer, the ransom notes, we sent out 2 more, I think, after that. And we started to see bands on stage talking in a different tone. There was more of that empowerment. The bands seemed to feel like, yeah, we're going to talk about what we want to happen, or we're going to do these benefits that support ideas that we believe in. And that's what I noticed, is I noticed the bands speaking more emphatically about looking after the world and each other.